The book I chose for this project is titled Empowering Struggling Readers Practices for the Middle Grades, written by Lee Hall, Leslie Burns, and Elizabeth Edwards. It provides an overview on how to reach struggling readers and how to improve their literacy capabilities. The text starts by defining what a struggling reader is. They classify that as anybody who has persistent difficulties in comprehending text and subject matter with or without a learning disability. Some students may refuse to read, cause disruption in class, or often appear from class discussions. But instead, many are actually just unhappy with their perceived status in the classroom. Some actually do enjoy reading and want to learn, but are just bored of the classwork. They also just simply don't know how to improve their abilities. Struggling readers make up a large portion of each class, so we need to understand them from a cognitive, motivational, social, and cultural standpoint. Struggling readers might have some classmates who meet or even exceed grade level standards, so it's important for teachers to teach to a diverse range of readers. There's no one size fits all approach. Teachers need to work with students and not necessarily on students and their abilities. They need to avoid misperceiving resistance as unwillingness to learn. Most students actually do want to be at or above grade level, but simply lack the skills needed to do so. The biggest challenge in teaching students who are struggling readers is that they simply don't understand the difference between reading for pleasure and reading for academic purposes. Often, struggling readers do not enjoy reading the way educators do. Many lack a term called disciplinary literacy, which is the knowledge of how and why subject area content is supposed to be used in school. Students may just feel bored. That's because they lack the appropriate skills. Not that they don't enjoy reading per se, but they simply just don't know how to read properly or at a high level. In addition, many teachers treat reading instruction and content knowledge as separate projects. As we've learned through our Tompkins text and Annenberg videos, that this is not the case. Reading is different in all subject matters. For example, in science, students may read more analytically to understand things such as chemical formulas. History classes, students might read chronologically and study cause and effect, whereas in English classes or language arts classes, they might simply be reading for comprehension only. Teachers of all subjects and all grade levels need to teach disciplinary literacy, meaning they teach the strategies needed to understand their content. And one way to do this is through a concept known as creating a third space classroom. What this is, it's a blend of first space and second space settings. For example, a first space setting is the student's home life, and a second space setting would be the school. So teachers can combine the two, and for example, in a language arts classroom, they can choose books that relate to a student's home life and their cultural backgrounds to lessen the amount of background knowledge required to understand text. In order to do this effectively, teachers need to establish positive classroom environments. Every student needs to have their own voice, and teachers should avoid segregating the class into good and poor readers. Teachers need to provide texts that are relatable, as we talked about the third space classroom, where you blend the home life and the school setting together. When students believe their voice is heard and they understand the material, they gain confidence and feel respected. They're more likely to engage in classroom discussions and in reading in general, which is always a good thing. This concept needs to be taught at an early age to prevent the poor reader label from ever beginning. Teachers need to understand what might limit a student and work around it. For example, some students might just find the material uninteresting, so teachers need to do a better job of selecting appropriate and relatable material. Other students might have social anxiety and are afraid of being wrong and how their peers will perceive them. So teachers need to do a good job of engaging the students in discussions that they might find simple to increase their confidence. In addition to creating a positive classroom environment, teachers need to engage and motivate their students. You can motivate the students both intrinsically and extrinsically. Extrinsic, obviously referring to anything that gets the student to gain an external reward. This should be used sparingly because you do not want the student to develop a dependence. It also usually only works short term. It can be something as simple as praise or a good grade. Intrinsic motivation refers to something that comes from within the student themselves and is something they can use to read for the rest of their lives. Um, Motivation kind of ties in with engagement, but engagement is more of a drawn out process. It begins with self efficacy, which is the belief of whether or not the student perceives himself as a good reader. It requires practice and repetition. The more a student reads, the better they become. The better they are, the more likely they are to persist through the challenges that come with reading. The more they persist, this leads to more overall success and overall engagement in the class. Limiting the use of short-term extrinsic factors is important, as I said. You want to focus more on long-term motivational strategies that create self-regulation among the students. Like I said, this leads to better engagement. Ways to do this include creating a purpose for reading. So instead of saying read chapters 1 through 3, you say read chapters 1 through 3 and for whatever reason that they are reading them. It's also important to explicitly teach reading strategies such as predicting, summarizing, questioning, and the other comprehension strategies that we learned in our Tompkins text. It's also important to provide choices for the students. For the example, the use of literature circles gives the students options to pick and choose texts that are relatable. So getting the students engaged and motivated promotes lifelong reading habits, and as a result, the students are more likely to engage in classroom discussions and reading in general. Although teachers and students are usually only held accountable for the learning done within the school, it's also important to assess what the students know outside of the school because it can and typically does affect learning within the school. This book, Empowering Struggling Readers, provides several examples of this type of assessment where the teacher can learn about a student's home life, their hobbies, their interests, what they like to read, what they don't like to read. This can help a teacher decide what literature can be considered appropriate, can also provide motivational engagement strategies. Also, many students find the personal questions interesting and simple to answer, so it makes it easy for a teacher to gauge the students' abilities to write or discuss their ideas when they're talking about something familiar or something that interests them. This book kind of jumps back a little bit and then discusses some comprehension strategies that also affect the students' literacy abilities. For example, some students aren't properly taught how to use comprehension strategies. Others may view them as tools that only poor readers use, so they're embarrassed to use them if other students perceive that they might be poor readers. Other students feel that using the strategies makes them read at a slower pace, and by falling behind, the perception is that other students think that they're poor readers, which is something they don't feel comfortable with. One way to prevent this negative perception of the use of comprehension strategies is to have classroom discussion that promotes the use of these strategies. It's also important for the teacher to teach the strategies themselves. It's also important for the students to develop a positive reading identity. A reading identity is a term used to describe the value individuals place on reading, how capable readers feel they are, and the interpretations of how people should use text in general. Teachers can use a student's reading identity to determine strengths and weaknesses of the class and what needs to be better addressed. One interesting point that the book made was that students can benefit from class readings where they see other students struggle. This promotes the fact that all readers should and do use comprehension strategies, not just struggling readers. Another point the book makes is that young adult literature is a positive way to engage students in comprehension and reading strategies. Young adult literature is geared towards 12 to 18-year-olds, typically features a narrator of their age. The material is relatable, it's easy to understand, which is very positive for struggling readers. It's also a huge genre, so teachers have a huge catalog to choose from. It's beneficial for three reasons. Many readers are motivated and engaged, so more competent reading exists. It improves the vision of self and world and can create opportunities for reflection. And adolescents simply enjoy reading these kind of books. The book then mentions the term literacy theory, which is a concept that asks students to question what they've read, look for biases, and use firsthand experience to make the text more relatable. There's many different types of literacy theory. There's race, there's gender, there's Marxist, among others. Literacy theory creates a better sense of engagement. It leads to increased comprehension and critical thinking when used with adult literature. Another way to improve the abilities of struggling readers is through vocabulary instruction. There's four components of a good vocabulary instruction program. The first component is to provide frequent and extensive language experience. The second is to teach specific words so students can define and analyze difficult words in upcoming texts, for example, through the use of a graphic organizer. The third component is teaching word learning strategies. There's contextual analysis, where students learn the definition by reading, using inferences and words around the vocab word to determine the definition. There's also morphemic analysis, which is using prefix and suffix and roots to determine the meaning of words. And the final component is called word consciousness, where students develop an interest in words. And again, this ties into the concept of intrinsic motivation. In addition, discussions are a great way to improve a student's abilities. Many students enjoy discussions and can learn a lot from their peers as well as the teacher. They can learn from students who have both different and similar perspectives. They also develop respect for one another's viewpoints. There's many different ways for a teacher to orchestrate a discussion. There's the traditional format, which is known as IRE, which stands for Interrogate, Respond, and Evaluate. This is typically a teacher-led discussion. There's also peer-led discussions where students bring their own questions and important concepts to the table. This creates responsibility and is a more modern approach. Another modern approach to promoting literacy is through something called new literacies, which we've discussed this summer. It's about online texts. Students who struggle with print may excel with online text, and at the same time, students who excel with print may struggle with online texts. There's not necessarily a correlation between the two. Struggling readers may enjoy the new literacies approach, and it can lead to improved comprehension, and students might be more likely to read online text on their own, leading to more repetition. Teachers can use online text through connections with language arts concepts such as reading, responding, and discussion. They can also use other non-print materials to promote literacy, such as TV, graphics, images, films, and so on. It's used for diversifying content knowledge, including comprehension, plot structure, and characterization. We watched an Annenberg video this summer where the teacher used images to show bias and create perspective. There's no guarantee for success, so teachers need to teach the strategies for interpretation as well. In summary, this book creates two premises for literacy. There's the student's perception of themselves, where they wonder who they are, who they want to be. They take their perceived abilities of themselves and of their peers into consideration. It's also about how they feel they're viewed. The other premise is the teacher's ability to set students up for success by creating a positive environment, creating motivation and engagement factors, choosing appropriate texts, and teaching the strategies needed for comprehension. This book really complements the Tompkins text pretty well. The points are repetitive, but they overlap, and they're also relevant and practical. Some points are pretty interesting, others seem like common sense, but employing these strategies should help improving the literacy abilities of struggling readers.